let's dive in. Today we're tackling John Dewey, a big name in American pragmatism.
Huge, yeah.
And, you sent in this chapter from what is it? It's an academic text, right?
It is, yeah.
About Dewey.
It is. It's called 010 Dewey, Andrea Paravicini.
And it's a PDF, so
Yeah.
it's from Z Library.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, so 010 Dewey, Andrea Paravicini, zlibrary.pdf. That's the source.
That is the source.
And it's packed with some really cool ideas.
Yeah.
Like, I was blown away by this concept that, Dewey thought that philosophy should be like as experimental as science.
I know, it's a really cool...
Even when it comes to ethics and politics.
It's really cool. It's like, you know how we often think about those things as very different?
Totally, yeah.
Like science is about facts and, kind of the objective truth, and then ethics and politics are all very kind of subjective and mushy.
Yeah.
He wants to bring that kind of rigor of science to those other areas.
That's fascinating. Yeah, because it's almost like he's saying you can test out different ethical frameworks.
Yeah, exactly.
See what the consequences are.
Yeah, see what actually works in the world, which I think is such a pragmatic approach.
And, he's a pragmatist.
Exactly, yeah.
So it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
We're also going to be looking at his idea of experience, which is really unique.
Oh, it's so cool.
It's not just about, passively absorbing information.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, I don't know, it's much more active.
It's very active. Yeah, it's like this engagement with the world around you.
Yeah.
It's how you learn, how you grow, how you develop as a person.
And it's all, and we'll talk about this, but it's all tied in with how Darwin's theory of evolution kind of influenced his thinking.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
There are some really cool connections there.
Okay, so before we really jump into the philosophy, Dewey the man.
Yes.
Can you paint us a picture of who this guy was? Because the text mentioned that he had kind of an interesting life, right?
He did. It's fascinating how much his life experiences really shaped his ideas.
Okay.
He started out in a pretty religious family.
Okay.
But he kind of felt like something was missing.
Like a void.
Yeah, like this void. And he found that missing piece through philosophy.
Oh, interesting.
But what's cool is that his interest in education, he was a big education reformer that was actually sparked by his son, Morris's development.
Oh, wow.
And he traveled the world, experiencing different cultures, engaging with global issues.
So not just an ivory tower academic?
No, definitely not. He was very much engaged with the world around him.
He was in it.
Yes.
So it sounds like even just from his own personal experience, that idea that experience is central to knowledge and learning.
Absolutely.
It's it's woven through his whole...
It's woven through his whole life and his whole philosophy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's... so the text mentions that, his thinking evolves quite a bit.
It did.
Right.
It did.
So where did he start, and then kind of where did he end up?
So early on, he was really influenced by Hegel.
Okay.
Hegel was a German philosopher who emphasized the interconnectedness of everything.
Okay.
But Dewey was also really into the scientific advancements of his time, especially Darwin's theory of evolution.
Okay. So you've got Hegel and you've got Darwin.
Yes.
Two very different, thinkers and schools of thought.
Right.
So how did those influence him?
Well, that's where pragmatism comes in.
Okay.
You see, Dewey saw that both Hegel's emphasis on interconnectedness and Darwin's theory of natural selection, they both pointed to this world where things are constantly evolving, adapting.
Okay, so it's not static.
Exactly. It's a very dynamic view of the world.
And so how did that shape his idea of pragmatism?
So his brand of pragmatism, it had a unique focus.
Okay.
For Dewey, it wasn't enough for an idea to be useful just for one person.
Okay.
It had to have these broader social consequences. He was interested in ideas that could be tested, proven valuable in the real world, that lead to real positive change.
It's what's the use of knowledge if it doesn't actually make the world a better place?
Got to have a practical application.
Right. Okay, so it's about more than just individual benefit.
Yes.
It's about knowledge and ideas having real measurable effects on society.
That's it. And this is where his view of experience becomes really important.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about that. Let's dive into experience.
Yeah.
Why was this concept so central to Dewey's philosophy?
Well, think about how we normally understand experience.
Okay.
It's kind of like we think of it as something passive,
Okay.
right?
Like a sponge.
Yeah, like we're just sponges soaking up information.
Yeah.
But Dewey, he flips that on its head.
He flips it.
Yeah, he says, no, it's not passive, it's active.
Okay.
You're not just a recipient of experience, you're shaping it.
So it's not just what happens to us, it's how we interact with and, like, shape our experience.
That's exactly right. He believed that experience is this active, dynamic process
Okay.
of interacting with our environment.
Okay.
And it's not just about thinking. It's about our emotions, our actions, our successes, and even our failures.
The whole shebang.
Yeah, the whole process of living.
Interesting. So, I mean, that's pretty different from how most people think about experience. How did he develop this idea?
You know, his shift away from seeing experience as passive was really influenced by what was going on in psychology at the time.
Okay.
This thing called the new psychology.
New psychology.
Yeah, thinkers like when they were challenging the traditional view of the mind as a blank slate.
No.
They were arguing that it actually actively shapes perception and understanding.
So instead of just receiving information,
Yes,
our minds are like actively creating meaning from our interactions with the world.
that's it. And for Dewey, this meant that learning wasn't just about passively absorbing facts.
Okay.
It was about actively engaging with our environment
Right.
and constructing our own understanding.
Got it. So this is starting to sound a lot like the scientific method applied to, like, learning and experience.
You're catching on.
Right.
Dewey saw a strong connection between how we learn and how scientific knowledge is developed.
Okay.
He believed they both involve this process of experimentation, observation, and adaptation.
That's fascinating. Okay. So you mentioned Dewey was influenced by Hegel early on.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more what you meant by Hegelian idealist?
Sure.
That sounds very complex.
It is a bit complex. But the key takeaway is that Hegel believed that reality is ultimately shaped by ideas, by concepts.
Okay.
Think of it this way. For Hegel, the way we understand the world, our ideas about it actually contribute to how the world itself is structured.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty mind-bending concept.
So it's not just that we have ideas about the world, but those ideas actually influence the world itself.
Right. In a way, yeah. It's like our thinking shapes reality.
Whoa.
But, Dewey eventually moved away from this purely idealistic view.
Okay.
But it did influence his understanding of how human thought and action can shape the world around us.
Okay.
So even though he embraced a more practical, experience-based approach, he still recognized the power of ideas.
To shape reality.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, and this is where his concept of the circuit of experience comes in, right?
Exactly. It's a model he used to describe this dynamic interplay between our actions, our environment, and our understanding.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break down this circuit idea for us.
Okay, so think about what was popular at the time.
Right?
This thing called the arc reflex model.
Arc reflex.
Arc reflex. And in that model, experience is a simple linear process.
Okay.
You get a stimulus, you have an idea, and then you respond.
Like touching a hot stove, you realize it's hot, and you pull your hand away.
Exactly, yeah. Ouch. Yeah, exactly. But Dewey saw this as too simplistic.
Okay.
It ignored the fact that our experience is this continuous dynamic process.
So it's not just like ABC done.
No.
It's more fluid than that.
Much more fluid, yeah. So he proposed this idea of a circuit
Okay.
where things are constantly flowing and influencing each other.
So it's not a one-way street.
Exactly. Instead of these isolated stimulus and response, our actions, our environment, our understanding, they're all interconnected
Interesting.
and constantly shaping each other.
Okay, so I'm starting to get how this circuit idea, challenges that traditional way of thinking about experience.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us a real-world example of, like, how this works?
Imagine learning to ride a bike.
Okay, yeah.
At first, you're focused on balancing, pedaling, steering. It's all awkward and disjointed.
Yeah.
But as you practice those separate actions, they start to blend together seamlessly. You're not thinking about each individual movement anymore. You're just riding.
You're just doing it.
Yeah.
Like your body and mind are working together,
Mm-hmm.
adapting to the environment, and creating this new integrated experience.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
And this highlights Dewey's key insight. Experience is not this passive reception of information. It's an active process of creating meaning.
Through our interactions with the world.
Exactly.
Wow. This is really fascinating. I'm starting to see how this idea of experience as an active process could have major implications for, how we approach learning, problem solving, maybe even ethics.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
And those are exactly the areas we'll explore more in depth as we continue our deep dive into Dewey's world.
Okay, I'm ready to keep going. This circuit of experience model has really got me thinking. But before we go any further, I'm still a little fuzzy on Dewey's shift away from Hegel.
Okay.
You said he moved away from this idea of idealism.
Right.
Can you help me understand what that means and why he made that shift?
Yeah, that's a key transition in his thinking. Remember how we talked about Hegel believing that reality is ultimately shaped by ideas?
Yeah, like our thoughts create the world.
Well, that's the essence of idealism. It's this view that the mind, or spirit, is the fundamental reality, and the material world is somehow, secondary to that.
So it's almost like our thoughts and ideas create the world around us.
In a very simplified way, yes. But Dewey saw some problems with this. He felt like it made philosophy too abstract, too detached from the practical realities of human experience.
So how did he bridge that gap? How did he move away from this purely idealist view?
Through his focus on experience and Darwin.
Darwin.
Yeah, Dewey saw that the world is constantly changing and evolving.
Okay.
And our understanding needs to adapt along with it. Darwin's theory of evolution showed how species evolve through this process of natural selection.
Survival of the fittest.
Right. And Dewey applied this idea to knowledge itself.
So instead of clinging to fixed, absolute ideas, we need to be open to new information, willing to adapt our understanding based on our experiences.
Exactly. He saw knowledge as a tool.
A tool?
Yeah, a tool for navigating and solving problems in a constantly changing world. It's not about finding some ultimate truth.
Okay.
It's about developing ideas that are useful and effective.
In specific contexts.
Right.
This is making me think about all the debates we see in the world today. It seems like people are often digging in their heels.
Yeah.
Clinging to their beliefs, even when presented with new evidence.
That's a great observation. I think Dewey would argue that this kind of rigidity, it's a danger.
A danger.
Yeah, a danger to both individual growth and social progress. He believed we should always be willing to question. Question our assumptions, test our beliefs, adapt our understanding based on new experiences.
So it's not about abandoning our principles, but about holding them in a way that allows for growth and change.
That's a great way to put it. For Dewey, being a pragmatist meant being open to revising your beliefs as you learn and grow. It's about recognizing that truth is not static, but something that emerges through our ongoing interactions with the world.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this approach could be applied to so many areas of life.
Right.
But I'm curious to hear more about how Dewey saw this playing out in society.
This brings us to one of his most influential ideas.
Okay.
His concept of democracy as a way of life.
So it's more than just voting in elections.
Much more. For Dewey, democracy wasn't just a political system. It was a way of living together, a way of organizing society that fostered inquiry, collaboration, growth.
Can you give us an example of what that looks like in practice?
Imagine a community facing a challenge.
Okay.
Like pollution in a local river.
Right.
In a Deweyan democracy, the community wouldn't just rely on experts or politicians to solve the problem. They would come together, share their knowledge and experiences, and collectively develop and test solutions.
So it's about empowering people to participate in solving the problems that affect their lives.
Exactly. And this process, this collective inquiry and experimentation, that's what Dewey saw as the heart of a thriving democracy.
Okay.
It's about creating a society where everyone has a voice, where knowledge is constantly being tested and refined through experience.
This is really resonating with me. It seems like there's a lot of talk about democracy these days, but maybe we've lost sight of what it really means to live democratically.
I think you're onto something. Dewey would argue that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires active participation, critical thinking, a willingness to work together to solve shared problems.
And that's where education comes in, right?
Yes.
Dewey was a huge proponent of educational reform.
Absolutely. He saw education as crucial for preparing individuals to participate in a democratic society. Remember his famous laboratory school?
Yes. The one where baking bread was a science lesson. It sounded so innovative.
It was. Dewey believed that learning shouldn't be confined to textbooks and lectures.
Okay.
He advocated for learning by doing.
Learning by doing.
Yeah, creating an environment where students could actively engage with the world, test out their ideas, and learn from their experiences.
So instead of passively absorbing information, students are encouraged to be active learners.
Yes.
to explore and experiment. It sounds like a very different approach to education than what many of us experienced.
It is. And while Dewey's ideas were sometimes controversial, they continue to inspire educators today.
That's great.
Educators who are looking for ways to make learning more engaging, relevant, and meaningful.
This makes me think about how we often separate subjects into neat little boxes. Math, science, history, literature. But Dewey seemed to see learning as a much more integrated experience.
That's right. He believed that learning should be holistic, connecting different areas of knowledge, relating them to real-world problems. He saw how even something like baking bread could be a lesson in science, math, history, even social cooperation.
So it's about breaking down these artificial barriers between disciplines, showing how knowledge is interconnected and relevant to our lives.
Exactly. And this approach to education, it's not just about preparing students for specific jobs. It's about cultivating the critical thinking skills, problem-solving abilities, and collaborative spirit they need to be active and engaged citizens.
In a democratic society.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. Dewey's views on experience, democracy, and education, they're all interconnected. They point to a vision of a society where individuals are empowered to learn, grow, and work together to shape their world.
You're getting it.
Okay.
And this vision, it's as relevant today as it was a century ago.
Absolutely.
In a world facing complex challenges like climate change, social inequality, and political polarization, Dewey's ideas offer a powerful framework for navigating these turbulent times.
Okay, I'm definitely feeling inspired, but also a bit daunted by the scope of it all. Where do we even begin to put these ideas into practice?
That's a great question, and Dewey wouldn't offer a simple recipe or a step-by-step plan. He believed that the process of democratic experimentation and social change, it's ongoing. It requires constant adaptation and refinement.
So it's not about finding the perfect solution,
Right.
but about embracing the process of inquiry and experimentation.
Exactly. It's about being willing to try new things, learn from our mistakes, work together to create a more just and equitable society.
I love that. It takes the pressure off finding the right answer.
Right.
And instead encourages us to embrace the messiness and uncertainty of real-world problem solving.
And I think that's one of the most valuable insights Dewey offers. He reminds us that progress is not a straight line. It's a journey of continuous learning, adaptation, and collaboration.
This is making me think about another area where Dewey's ideas seem particularly relevant today. The role of technology in our lives.
That's an interesting connection. Dewey didn't live to see the rise of the internet and social media.
True.
But I think his ideas about communication, community, and democracy, they have a lot to offer us as we grapple with the impact of these technologies.
I'm curious to hear more about that. How do you see Dewey's ideas applying to the digital age?
Well, Dewey saw communication as essential to the functioning of a democratic society.
Right.
He believed that open and honest dialogue is crucial for sharing information, building understanding, and solving problems together.
That sounds pretty straightforward, but I'm guessing it gets more complicated when we consider the realities of online communication.
You're right. Dewey was writing in a time when communication was primarily face-to-face or through print media.
Yeah.
The digital age has created a whole new landscape of communication with its own set of challenges and opportunities.
Like the spread of misinformation, echo chambers, and online harassment.
Exactly. Those are all areas where I think Dewey's ideas could be really helpful.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Can you give us some concrete examples of how his ideas might apply to these challenges?
Let's start with misinformation.
Okay.
Dewey emphasized the importance of critical thinking,
Right.
being able to evaluate information from different sources.
Which is hard online.
It is. And in the digital age, this skill is more important than ever.
It's so easy to get caught up in those sensational headlines or to share something without really checking if it's true.
That's right. And Dewey would urge us to be more discerning.
Discerning.
Yeah, discerning consumers of information, to question our assumptions, to seek out diverse perspectives. He'd also encourage us to be responsible,
Okay.
to fact-check before we repost,
Right.
to be mindful of the potential impact of our words.
Online.
Yeah.
This is making me think about how algorithms often reinforce our existing biases, create those echo chambers where we only hear from people who agree with us.
That's a huge challenge.
Yeah?
To Dewey's vision of democracy as a space for open and honest dialogue, he believed that we need to be exposed to different viewpoints, even ones that challenge our own.
Make us uncomfortable.
Yes, exactly, in order to grow and learn.
So how do we break out of these echo chambers? How do we foster more productive conversations online?
I think Dewey would encourage us to be more intentional.
Intentional about?
About seeking out diverse perspectives, to engage in respectful dialogue, even with those we disagree with, and to be willing to listen and learn from others.
That sounds like a tall order in today's polarized online environment.
It is. But I think Dewey would argue that it's essential for the health of our democracy.
Okay.
He believed that democracy requires a commitment to reasoned debate, a willingness to compromise, a recognition that we are all part of a shared community.
I love that idea. It's a reminder that even though we may disagree on specific issues, we're all in this together. We need to find ways to communicate and collaborate to solve shared problems.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most important lessons we can take from Dewey's work.
Okay.
He offers us a vision of democracy as a living, breathing process, one that requires constant engagement, critical thinking, and a willingness to work together to create a more just and equitable world. Okay, that's incredibly inspiring. But I have to admit, there's a part of me that's still skeptical. It's easy to talk about democracy and collaboration, but how do we actually make it happen in a world that often feels so divided and driven by self-interest?
That's a fair point. Dewey was a realist.
Okay.
And he recognized the challenges of putting his ideas into practice. He knew that change doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
And that it requires sustained effort, both individually and collectively.
So it's not about waiting for some perfect utopia to arrive, but about actively working to make things better, one step at a time.
Exactly. And Dewey would say that the first step is to cultivate a certain mindset, a way of approaching the world that is open, inquisitive, and collaborative. He believed that we need to see ourselves not as isolated individuals, but as interconnected members of a community, responsible for shaping our shared destiny.
This is really making me rethink my role as a citizen and a member of society. It's not enough to just complain about problems or retreat into my own bubble. I need to find ways to engage, to contribute, to be part of the solution.
That's the spirit. Dewey would be thrilled to hear you say that. He believed that each of us has a responsibility to participate in the democratic process, to use our voices, our talents, our experiences to make the world a better place.
Okay, I'm feeling fired up. But before I go out and start a grassroots movement, I have one more question.
Okay.
About a topic that feels a bit different from the practical social focus we've been discussing. Art. Where does art fit into Dewey's vision of experience and democracy?
That's a great question, and it might seem like a bit of a shift.
Yeah.
But for Dewey, art was not just a form of entertainment or decoration. He saw it as a vital aspect of human experience and a powerful force for social change.
Really? So it's more than just museums and galleries.
Yeah.
Pretty pictures and sculptures.
Absolutely. Dewey believed that art is an essential way of experiencing and making meaning of the world. It's about engaging with our senses, our emotions, our imaginations, to create something new and meaningful.
Okay, I'm intrigued. But how does this connect to his ideas about democracy and social progress?
For Dewey, art was a powerful tool.
Okay.
For fostering empathy, challenging assumptions, imagining new possibilities. He saw it as a way to break down barriers, connect with others, spark social change.
Can you give us an example of how he saw art playing this role?
Think about a powerful piece of art,
Okay.
like a painting, a song, a film, that addresses a social issue, like poverty, inequality, or injustice.
Right.
Dewey believed that art like this could move people,
Right.
challenge their preconceptions, inspire them to take action.
So it's not just about creating something beautiful. It's about using art to raise awareness,
Yes.
to spark dialogue,
Exactly.
to move people to action.
Exactly. And Dewey saw this as a vital part of the democratic process. He believed that a thriving democracy needs a vibrant art scene
Okay.
that encourages creativity, critical thinking, and engagement with the world around us.
This is making me think about the role of artists as social critics, as activists, using their work to challenge the status quo,
Yes.
to inspire change.
That's a great connection. Dewey would definitely see artists as playing a crucial role in a democratic society.
Okay.
He believed that artists have this unique ability to see the world differently, to challenge our assumptions, to help us imagine new possibilities.
This is giving me a whole new appreciation for the power of art. I'm starting to see how it connects to Dewey's larger project of creating a more just, equitable, and fulfilling world.
That's what makes Dewey's work so fascinating. He saw connections between seemingly disparate areas of life: education, democracy, art, science, even religion. He believed that all of these aspects of human experience, they're interconnected, and they all contribute to our understanding of the world and our place in it.
Okay, now I'm really curious to hear about Dewey's views on religion.
Okay.
We've talked about experience, democracy, education, even art. How does religion fit into his overall philosophy?
That's a great question. Dewey's views on religion are complex, and they often surprise people. He was raised in a religious household, but he moved away from traditional forms of belief as he developed his own philosophical ideas.
So was he an atheist? Did he reject the idea of religion altogether?
Not exactly. Dewey was critical of what he saw as the dogma and authoritarianism of organized religion.
Okay.
He felt that many religious institutions were more concerned with preserving tradition than with fostering genuine spiritual growth.
So he wasn't a fan of blind faith or rigid doctrines?
Not really. He believed that genuine religious experience should be rooted in lived experience, not in unquestioning adherence to dogma.
Okay, so what did he see as the value of religious experience?
For Dewey, religious experience was about a sense of connection to something larger than oneself.
Okay.
A feeling of awe and wonder in the face of the mystery and complexity of the universe.
So it's more about a feeling or an attitude than a specific set of beliefs.
Exactly. He believed that this sense of connection to something larger than ourselves, it could be a source of meaning, purpose, and inspiration in our lives.
This is making me think about how people find meaning and purpose in all sorts of ways.
Right.
Not just through traditional religion. It could be through nature, art, music, or even community involvement.
You're right. Dewey was open to the idea that people could find spiritual fulfillment in many different ways. He didn't believe that there was one right path to religious experience.
So it's about finding what resonates with you, what connects you to something larger than yourself, whether that's through traditional religion or some other avenue.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that open-minded approach, it's something we can all learn from Dewey.
Yeah.
He encourages us to be curious, to question our assumptions, to be open to new experiences and new ways of understanding the world.
Okay. My head is officially spinning with all these fascinating ideas. I need a moment to process everything we've covered.
I understand. Dewey's philosophy, it's rich and complex, it takes time to digest, but I think it's well worth the effort.
I agree. This deep dive has been incredibly rewarding.
Good.
But before we completely lose ourselves in the intricacies of Dewey's thought, I have a burning question.
Okay.
If Dewey were alive today, what do you think his take would be on the state of the world? What issues would he urge us to address? And what tools would he offer for tackling them?
That's a question that could keep us going for another, 3 episodes probably.
Easy. Yeah.
He was such a keen observer of his time, and I think he would bring that same insightful perspective to today's world.
So no crystal ball predictions, but we can kind of use his thinking as a lens to understand our current situation.
Exactly. And knowing Dewey, he wouldn't offer, easy answers.
Right.
Or a fixed blueprint for anything.
Could be like, figure it out yourselves.
Yeah. He'd probably start by urging us to approach these issues with a spirit of experimentation.
Yeah.
And collaboration.
It's that, democracy as a way of life idea again.
Yeah.
It's not just about waiting for our leaders to solve things.
Yeah.
It's about, active participation from everyone.
You got it. He'd remind us that we're all part of this complex web of relationships. Our actions have ripple effects.
We're all connected.
Yes, exactly. We can't just sit back and expect other people to fix things.
But let's get specific. What issues in our time do you think would really grab Dewey's attention?
Well, given his deep concern for social justice and equality, I think the widening gap between the rich and the poor would be a major focus for him. He'd probably see it as a threat to the very fabric of democracy.
That makes sense. I mean, he was writing during a time of rapid industrialization.
Right.
And, social upheaval. Kind of similar to our own era of technological disruption.
Right. And he'd likely push us to examine how economic systems and policies are impacting people's lives. Encourage us to experiment with new models that promote greater fairness and opportunity for all.
Dewey always seemed to bring it back to education, too. How do you think you view our current educational landscape?
He'd probably be both impressed by the advancements, but also concerned by the inequalities. He would love the access to information we have now
Right.
and the potential for personalized learning. But I think he'd be worried about the digital divide
Oh, yeah.
and the overemphasis on standardized testing.
So more focus on fostering critical thinking,
Yes.
creativity,
Yes.
and that love of learning that he championed.
Absolutely. He'd be pushing for an education system that equips students to be active, engaged citizens, capable of tackling the complex challenges of the 21st century.
Right.
He'd be all about nurturing that spirit of inquiry and collaboration we talked about.
And given the rise of misinformation and echo chambers online, I imagine media literacy would be high on his list of priorities.
Oh, without a doubt. He'd likely be appalled by how easily falsehoods spread online and how algorithms can trap people in these bubbles of confirmation bias. I can almost picture him writing a new book
Oh, yeah.
titled, Democracy in the Digital Age.
What would be his key message?
I think he'd urge us to be more critical,
Okay.
more discerning consumers of information, teach us how to evaluate sources, identify bias, and engage in respectful debate, even with those we disagree with.
Right.
He'd see those skills as essential for a healthy democracy in the digital age.
This brings up another point. Dewey seemed to really believe in the power of collective intelligence, like people coming together to solve problems. Yet we're seeing so much polarization and division these days. How would he address that?
He'd likely remind us that democracy requires more than just voting every few years.
Right.
It's about actively participating in our communities,
Yeah.
engaging with diverse perspectives, finding common ground, even amidst disagreements. He'd probably be a big advocate for initiatives that promote dialogue
Okay.
and understanding across divides.
So town hall meetings in the metaverse,
Yeah.
collaborative problem-solving platforms. I can see Dewey embracing those tools to bring people together.
Absolutely. He was a pragmatist, always looking for practical ways to put his ideas into action. And he understood that technology, used wisely, could be the powerful tool for fostering connection
Right.
and collaboration.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. It's amazing how Dewey's thinking from a century ago still feels so relevant
I know.
to the challenges we're facing today.
That's the mark of a truly insightful philosopher, I think.
Yeah.
His work offers this timeless framework for understanding the human condition and navigating the complexities of social life.
I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on things. I'm definitely feeling inspired to be more active,
Good.
more engaged in shaping a better future. Any final words of wisdom from Dewey to leave our listeners with?
I think he'd remind us that progress is not a destination.
Okay.
It's a journey. It's about constantly experimenting, learning from our mistakes,
Yeah.
and working together to create a more just, equitable, and fulfilling world for all.
Beautifully put. And a huge thank you to you for taking us on this deep dive into the world of John Dewey.
My pleasure.
To our listener, we hope you found this exploration as thought-provoking as we did.
I hope so.
Until next time, remember, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep engaging with the world around you.